Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Kings, Melachim Bet, Perek Chaf Gimel, chapter 23. We're at verse 31. Jehoachaz, the son of Yoshiyahu, was just placed on the throne by the people. And unfortunately, we are going to see that Jehoachaz returns to the path of his ancestors, the evil ancestors, does not continue the reforms of his father. One wonders what would have happened had Jehoachaz continued on the path of his father and maybe brought the people closer to God, closer back to building the kind of society that God wanted. Would God have turned his wrath around? When one reads the book of Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, who was the prophet throughout this entire time, one gets the feeling that there's constantly a way. There could have been a way for people to turn around. But if people would only have gotten the message, but they didn't. And their leaders certainly did not lead them in the right direction, as we're about to read. Verse 31, Ben Esrim v'shalosh shana Jehoachaz b'malcho. Jehoachaz was 23 years old when he became king. Ushlosha chadashim malach b'Yerushalayim. And for 3 months he was the king in Jerusalem. Remember, his father had just been killed by the Egyptian army which was on its way to Carchemish. V'shem imo, and his mother's name was Chamutal bat Yirmiyahu mi Livna. Chamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah from Livna. Vayas hora be'enei Adonai, he did evil in the eyes of God, kechol asher asu avosav, just as all of his as many of his predecessors had done. Vayasreu Pharaoh necho. At this point, the Egyptians, after being defeated by the Babylonians, had still not lost their hegemony, their dominance over this part of Judah yet. We will see soon that they will. And Pharaoh Necho, who was the Pharaoh who killed Yoshiyahu, Jehoachaz's father, he locked him up, imprisoned him berivla be'eretz Hamas, in the land of Hamat, right? Mimeloch b'Yerushalayim, to keep him away from reigning, from being sitting on the throne in Jerusalem, because Jehoachaz was acting rebellious against Egypt. Egypt, to teach him a lesson, locked him up to keep him away from the throne. Vayiten onesh ala oretz, and they punished the land with a heavy tax of mea kikar kesef v'kikar zav, of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Vayamlech Pharaoh Necho et Jehoyakim ben Yoshiyahu tachas Yoshiyahu aviv, and Pharaoh Necho, excuse me, taking Jehoachaz off the throne, he placed Jehoyakim, the son of Yoshiyahu, on the throne in place of his father Yoshiyahu. Vayasev et shemo Jehoyakim, and he changed his name from Eliakim to Jehoyakim. By changing his name, he's asserting his power, that he's the king because I made him king. V'et Jehoachaz, and the king that he took down, who apparently was acting way too rebellious to Egypt, he took him, Lakach, Vayavu Mitzrayim Vayamas Sham, he took him to Egypt as a prisoner, and he died there. It seems like he died of natural causes, or maybe he died in prison, but he wasn't actually executed. V'yakesef v'hazahav, and the gold and silver which the Pharaoh Necho taxed the people of Judah, Nasan Jehoyakim leFaro, Jehoyakim paid that tribute to Pharaoh. Ach he'erich et haaretz. However, in order to make that payment, rather than paying it from the royal funds, he exacted a heavy tax upon the people. Laseses hakefses al piparo ishki erko nogas esa kesef. Nogas means he extracted it, right? He pulled it away. So you get the sense of putting the heavy burden on the people. It reminds us of the prophet Jeremiah at the same time, talking about how the rich and the wealthy subjugated the poor, took advantage of the poor. And here, instead of paying it out of royal funds, one gets the sense from this verse that he could have afforded to get it from many places, but instead he chose to take it from the poor. In previous occasions, when they were forced to pay tribute We even had a nod to the fact that some of the kings paid tribute from the temple riches and temple wealth. The Chizkiyahu himself had to pay that to the Assyrian forces. And we understood that that had to be done. And here that could have been done, but instead of doing that, he turned it to the people. He took it at Ha'aretz, l'seis l'Pharaoh Necho, in order to pay tribute to the Pharaoh Necho. Ben Esrim v'chamesh shana Jehoyakim b'mocho. Jehoyakim was 25 years old when he became king. V'achas esrei shana malach b'Yerushalayim, and he ruled for 11 years in Jerusalem. V'shem imo Zivuda bat Pedaya min Ruma. His mother's name was Zivuda bat Pedaya, from the place of Ruma. Vayas hara be'enei Adonai kechol asher asu avosav. And he did bad, he did evil in the eyes of God, similar to his predecessors, his forefathers before him. So Jehoyakim, Jehoachaz, both led the people in the wrong direction. Biyamav, in his day, Allah Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, then arose. Nebuchadnezzar, at the time of the battle of Carchemish, which was the battle in which Pharaoh Necho and the Assyrian forces encountered the Babylonian forces and were beaten by the Babylonian forces, Nebuchadnezzar was the general. After the battle, the king of Babylon died, and Nebuchadnezzar was then appointed king. So now he's the king, and we also know from historical sources that Nebuchadnezzar attacked and conquered Egypt and eliminated Egypt from being any major power in the area anymore. So Egypt then had no more business deciding who's the king of Judah, because now the power is Babylon. So in the days of Jehoyakim, while Jehoyakim having been put on the throne by the Egyptians, Nebuchadnezzar now gets up and he takes charge. Vayihilo Jehoyakim Eved, and he made Jehoyakim a servant to him, Shalosh Shanim, for 3 years. Then, so in other words, he, instead of paying tribute to Egypt, he was paying tribute to Babylon. Vayosha Vayimrod Bo, and then he went and he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, against the king of Babylon. Vayishalach, and one wonders how he had the audacity to do this. We discussed this a little bit more in depth when we studied Jeremiah together. But he had the people had this blind faith in the temple that God would save them, even though they weren't living the kind of life that they were supposed to live. They believed in the strength of the temple, but not understanding that the temple does nothing for you when your behavior does not reflect the kind of behavior that God wants you to live. But for those ideas, and for that perspective, you should go study the book of Jeremiah again, which was obviously taking place throughout this entire period. Vayishalach Adonai Boet Gedudei Kastim. So God sent against him raiding bands or troops of Kastim, Chaldeans. Chaldeans were allied with the Babylonians to the extent that over time the Kastim, or which is translated into English usually as Chaldeans, and Babylonians pretty much became one in the same country, Kasdim and Babylonians and Bavliim. So there were different ethnicities that became the primary groups of the Babylonian Empire. Vet Gedudei Aram, and also Arameans. Remember, prior to the Assyrians, the Arameans were the big empire. But so these Arameans were now the remaining, the ethnic Arameans were allied with the Babylonians. Vet Gedudei Moab and the Moabites. Vet Gedudei Bnei Ammon and the Ammonites. So all of these other groups, which are now all under the wing of the Babylonian Empire, when Jehoiakim decides, rather than submit like everyone else to Babylon, but to rebel, the Babylonian Empire sent soldiers from all of these groups to attack. Vayishalchem b'Yehuda la'avido, and he sent them against Judah to ruin Judah. Kidvar Adonai asher diber b'yad avadav hanaviim, as God had spoken to his servants through the prophets. Achal pi Adonai haysa b'Yehuda. All of this happened to Yehuda la'asir me'al panav, because God's ultimate goal was to get Judah away, to remove Judah from his place, to exile Judah, to get Judah away from Jerusalem, b'chatos Menashe, because of the sins of Menashe, k'chol asher asah, and all of the things that he did. And Jehoyakim, just to emphasize how bad and how evil he was, this wasn't just a philosophical or theological flaw that the people had, that they worshipped idols. The Gam Dam Hanaki Asher Shafach, we talked about how he oppressed the people with taxes. And Dam Hanaki Asher Shafach, he spilled innocent blood in the streets. Vayimalei Yerushalayim Dam Naki, and he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which makes you think of a corrupt legal system. This kind of behavior God would not forgive. Now, we said God would destroy Yehuda, but God didn't destroy Yehuda yet. God sent attacks. So, and Jeremiah, when one gets the sense that all of these were opportunities for the people to turn around, but consistently they continued and persisted in their evil, bad behavior. V'yeser divrei Jehoyakim k'chol asher asah, and all of the other things that Jehoyakim did, if you want to read about them, Halohim ksuvim al sefer divrei hayomim l'malchei Yehuda, you're welcome to go get the book of Chronicles for the kings of Judah and read about it there. Vayishkav Jehoyakim im avosav, Jehoyakim died and laid with his ancestors. Vayimloch Jehoyachin beno tachtav, and his son Jehoyachin now became the king afterwards. So now we're up to Yoshiyahu's grandson. So first it was Yoshiyahu's son, Jehoachaz, who was king. He was kidnapped and sent to Egypt, and the Egyptians placed Jehoyakim, his brother, Yoshiyahu's other son, on the throne, both of whom led the people in an awful, awful direction. And now Jehoiakim's son, Jehoiachin, becomes the king. At this point, the king of Egypt no longer was able to leave his land. By this point, the king of Babylon had taken complete control over the entire area from Nachal Mitzrayim, from Wadi Egypt, which is a river in modern Sinai, right? Or at least riverbed, Ad Nahar Paras, to the river Euphrates. So Babylon had taken control of this entire section of the Middle East. All those places which were under Egyptian influence had now been completely taken care of been taken control of by the Babylonian Empire. So the Babylonian Empire had solidified their control, so no longer was Jehoiakim able to look to Egypt for support, and no longer was Egypt a player in this field here at all, which we know from extra biblical historical sources. We know that this corroborates this account that is being stated here in the verses. So we now end this podcast with the end of the career of Jehoiakim, the beginning of the career of Jehoiachin. We will begin reading about the career of Jehoiachin as we hurtle rapidly down this cascading avalanche towards the ultimate destruction. It's sad to read. You might note that in many places I'm stopping and starting not exactly with the beginnings and the ends of the chapters. That's because the way the chapters are broken up by the numbers that we're accustomed to, which were put in by non-Jewish sources, I'm not exactly holding to those. So sometimes I read, in order to divide up the stories into what seems to make a little bit more sense. Again, thank you so much for studying together with me. Looking forward to studying the rest of chapter 24, the rest of this wonderful book of Kings. Have a wonderful day.